You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, September 18th, 2025 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And last week, I talked about the earthquake of abandonment terror as dismissing people experience it and maybe overcome it. And I thought tonight that I would follow that up with the earthquake of abandonment terror, how preoccupied people experience it and how you might overcome it. So abandonment terror is the activation of the attachment system. So really what we're talking about is abandonment fear or abandonment terror. I like to use the word terror because for small children and for, well, even into middle childhood, the experience of being lost or abandoned by your caregiver produces that response that is experienced by the child as life-threatening, really. I think when it comes from, if you look at it evolutionarily, for instance, the life expectancy of a great ape baby separated from its caregiver is about an hour and a half, very short. And human babies, obviously, it's not so far off from that if they were completely abandoned. And great ape babies are much better at responding to the environment than human babies are. If you look at the response that children have to abandonment, of course, the first thing that they do is look as cute as they can to attract attention. And actually, around 42 minutes is the first time a newborn infant responds with that first request for attachment. Babies don't see so much, infants don't see so much, but they do track movement. And then there's a reflexive smile that they adopt in response to that to draw attention. If that doesn't work, then there's a kind of whimpering that happens, very distinct. You'll notice, I always marveled when my godkids would have these big birthday parties, 3-4-year-olds running around, a sea of 3 and 4-year-olds running around, and the parents standing in circles talking, but all of a sudden you could see the in that cacophony of child glee, a parent hearing the distress call of her kid and rushing off to go find them to see what's going on. So very distinctive in that way. If nobody comes with the whimper, then there's an intermittent cry, and then the intermittent cry turns into a continuous cry, and that continuous cry turns into a tantrum. But if nobody comes in response to a tantrum, the child goes into anaclytic depression where everything shuts down and they preserve energy to preserve life. So it's so built into us. You might say Freud thought that the thing that drove everything was the death instinct, that we're very sensitive to it, even if we don't have a cognitive understanding of it. So the earthquake of abandonment terror, of course, is followed by what I call the terrible sadness, the tsunami of terrible sadness. There's your metaphor, earthquake and tsunami. And that combination manifests differently depending on what your attachment strategy is. The terrible sadness for dismissing people, as I was talking about last week, is the sense of abandonment that they experience, the sense of rejection that they experience, that there's nothing really that they can do to beckon the caregiver to be responsive to them. They have to be responsive to the caregiver. So it's a kind of reversal there. But in preoccupation, what really is going on is the caregiver is so distracted and so uh, um, lacking in monitoring that the child experiences a chaotic caregiver. And so they can't really predict how to elicit a response from the caregiver predictably, which is really a sense of helplessness or powerlessness in relating to their caregiver. In a secure dynamic, the caregiver provides consistent care. They're sensitively attuned, they empathetically connect, they're interested in understanding what the needs of the child are and how those needs are presented so that they can understand that. And then they can provide the care that the child needs. What that does on the child side, of course, is you begin to learn how to express your needs in such a way that the caregiver can respond with them by meeting those needs. So the child, in monitoring the back and forth with the caregiver, understands that if they do a certain gesture, it's likely to elicit a certain kind of care. And so they learn to communicate in that pre-verbal, pre-self manner. And when you are around caregiver and infant who have developed this dialogue, the communication is quite fast and developed, and the caregiver can be quite responsive to the needs of the child because they really understand what they are. But this doesn't happen for insecure kids and for disorganized kids. For the dismissing child, of course, the dismissing infant, they're neglected. And the caregiver is present but absent to that attunement that would let them understand. And they provide for the child what they think the child should have, rather than taking the cue from the child themselves. But in preoccupation, the care is chaotic. And the experience of the caregiver is really caught up and scattered and caught up and scattered. And they respond to the child in the way that they think that the child needs to be taken care of, but are also oblivious, really, to the signs that the child is expressing. This is different in a way from the way an avoidant child experiences it. And in the childhood of an anxious avoidant child who becomes a dismissing adult, of course, the misattunement is consistent and unchanging. And it is the care that the parent thinks the child should receive and not what the child indicates. In the preoccupied experience, there isn't really a plan for the care in the way that there is in a dismissing family system. It's scattered and gathered, scattering thoughts that are then in a moment grabbed. And so there's no continuity between previous moments of care, no continuity in the overall picture of care that they think that the child should receive. It's really spontaneous. Whereas in the dismissing side, it's planned. And the plan is not varied depending on what happens. The child, of course, thinks that if they can just get it right, if they can just present in a way that the caregiver wants, that the caregiver will take care of them. And every now and then, when the care that the caregiver provides lines up with the care that the child needs, the child thinks that they've gotten it right. And that if they could just figure out how to get it right again, they could more reliably get the care that they need. And that causes the child to enmesh with the mind state of the caregiver. Of course, the caregiver in an anxious, ambivalent child that grows up to be a preoccupied adult, the caregiver is actually eliciting the child's attention to enmesh in their mind state, because they use the child to regulate with. Is that all making sense so far? In some sense, both an avoidant and a preoccupied, or dismissing and a preoccupied person, abandon themselves in order to interact with the caregiver. In the childhood of neglect that produces a dismissing adult, what you have is somebody who doesn't learn interaction particularly well with another person, because they're not taught that with their caregivers. If you look at that progression of development, we all start out as auto-regulating. That is to say, we regulate ourselves. And then if somebody comes along reliably enough that we can reorient, get help from them to regulate, we reorient it that way. And if they come reliably enough that we can learn from them how to regulate ourselves, we move into a collaborative system of regulating, where we become really expert at regulating our own emotions, and then recognize when we can't regulate ourselves that we have somebody available to us who can help us regulate. So it's in the secure dynamic, it's always this movement between exploration and self-regulation to coming back to the caregiver for co-regulation. And that's really the secure dynamic, co-regulation, moving away and coming back, and both pieces are in that. In the preoccupied formulation, the caregiver comes reliably enough that you move out of the auto-regulation orientation into being regulated by the caregiver, but they don't come reliably enough where you learn to do it for yourself. So you remain dependent on the emotional regulation capacity of the other person. And because their capacity to regulate you is so unreliable, you are often in a state of dysregulation. And so in some sense, what you do is you learn to manage operating in life with a high level of emotional dysregulation. The way that dismissing people manage that is they suppress the sympathetic nervous system. They suppress the attachment system. And they hyperactivate the parasympathetic nervous system, which shuts down the emotions. So they don't react to the attachment system, and they don't feel much. They're cognitive. Preoccupied people, it's the opposite of that. They're very spontaneous, but they don't monitor. Where the dismissing person really needs to pay attention to how to present to their caregivers what the caregivers want. And they can learn that well enough to be very good at predicting what to do and then doing it, so that they get care and it's more reliable. But it is all cognitive. It's not feeling. Whereas with preoccupied, because there's no pattern in producing the result, they don't put energy into learning to monitor. They're very spontaneous. They learn to ask over and over and over and over again for the thing that they want. in somewhat modified ways, because that's more predictive of getting the care that they need. You've seen small children with their caregivers, I would bet, out in public, who just keep asking for the thing that they want from the caregiver because they never believe the no that the caregiver is giving them. They ask, the caregiver says no, they ask, the caregiver says no, they ask, the caregiver says no, they ask, and then the caregiver gets worn down from having to say no and says yes, which produces the narrative that I just have to keep asking in order to get the thing. And there's no continuity or plan in the giving in that way. Do you really want a child understanding and directing the care that they receive? It doesn't really make sense, would it?
Hey, George.
Hi.
So the first question is the preoccupation. Is it true to say that one of the skills that they have to learn is autoregulation? Is in some sense bringing the attention back?
In the preoccupied person? The preoccupied person is looking for regulation in the other person. What they usually do is enmesh with the mind state and also with their empathetic experience of the emotion of the other person. And then they identify with the mind state of the other person, and they identify with the empathetic experience of the other person's emotion. And then they regulate the other person, and in regulating the other person, they feel regulated. So in some sense, it's still an outward direction, which we wouldn't necessarily call auto-regulating.
Oh, sorry, I meant the skill that they need to learn would be autoregulation.
Right. They need, we make a distinction between auto-regulating and mastery of self-regulation. The reason for that is that the mastery of self-regulation is you get very good at regulating yourself, but you understand as soon as you can't regulate yourself, you turn to somebody who can help you. And it's one piece, it's not a back and forth. Whereas auto-regulating, you just learn to regulate yourself. And there's never this thought that you should turn towards somebody else to help you regulate. And why would there be? Nobody came reliably, never learned to regulate with someone else. You've always been an island to yourself. There was never a time when there was an experience of that happening. Most of the time when somebody who grows up to be dismissing in childhood would express themselves authentically, they would be rejected. And the caregiver would insist that they present the point of view that the caregiver wanted. And so they also learn to protect their authentic experience and never reveal it to anyone, because the pain of that continuous rejection in childhood is so deep. That's their terrible sadness, that they construct these elaborate defense mechanisms which are highly inflated in order to protect themselves from that deep sadness around having been unwanted. Who they are authentically unwanted, and instead who they're not is what was wanted. But there's none of that long vision in preoccupied experience. It's all just short, disconnected flashes of direction. There's no point in monitoring any of it. It doesn't make sense. It would be more distressing to attempt to make sense out of it. Instead, you identify your own failing in being able to predict what response you need to make, and you just keep making them. I call it hectoring. And then eventually it lines up, as they like to say. You put a monkey in front of a typewriter, and at a certain point he'll he'll type for who the bell tolls, right? Just because it randomly falling into place. That
So,
makes
yeah, and then you use the word enmeshment. That means what? That means that you can differentiate your own emotion from another emotion.
yeah, you don't, there's no distinguishing between self and other. There in a lot of cases, no distinguishing between inside and outside.
That this is my opinion and is your opinion.
This is where I end and this is where you start. Nope.
It's so funny. I know. I was like, wait a second. These are like advanced practices also, where
Right.
the practice
The
is,
path to liberation.
yeah, the practice is see where you end and see, and you can find the boundary. So is
Right.
that the same?
But you're not losing the boundary in someone else and identifying uh, yourself and them as one. So you can identify the boundary in enmeshment. It's just including two people, as
Right.
opposed to
In the
dissolving that boundary and just being energy and space.
exactly that there's neither here, neither there, neither third. So that's the
Right.
difference. In this case, you're saying, and preoccupation is we both are one.
Right. 1 + 1 = 1 is the formulation.
And then lastly, I've seen this preoccupation in adults where this per is it the same? I don't know the example. This that the person would speak again and again and again. Uh, and I'm not sure what you mean by like eventually it clicks with somebody. What's the eventually it you know
Um,
the bell tolls.
if you have a small child say, I want this doll. No, can't have a doll. I want this doll with the blue dress. Don't, can't have a doll. I want this doll with the red curls. Don't, can't have a doll. I want this doll that has the black shoes. Can't have a doll. On and on, and on and on. And the child keeps going. They never stop. And then the parent finally says, oh, all right, you can have it. And then the child gets the doll. And what the child understands is the no isn't real and that they just asked wrong. And so they just ask again. They just ask again, 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 again. And then they become inconsolable if you don't acquiesce. Because they
Like
feel,
saying please again and again, like kids do if they want something.
yeah.
Please, please, please. How does this appear in adults? Because there was somebody that I met recently, and I was kind of getting triggered because this person would tend to speak her personal experience and won't stop. And I wasn't sure.
Well, the asking and the sometimes what the ask is proximity seeking, right? So all they need is to be proximate to you. They enmesh almost immediately. They begin to emotionally regulate you. And the thing that makes them feel safe, which keeps the abandonment terror at bay, is actual physical proximity to you. And there are certain things that cue to them that the proximity is going to be lost. And one of them is that you stop paying attention to them. And so what they learn to do is to begin to engage with you in such a way that you'll pay attention to them. So they're asking you about things or they're telling you a story. And what you notice in the way that they do that is that they don't leave a gap between the sentences or the words that they say. That's the first indication. Because in a normal conversation, you present an idea and leave a gap so the other person can respond. And then they make their contribution and then they leave a gap so you can respond. If you look at it in terms of the structure of a conversation, that means each of you are holding up your side of the conversation. But in somebody who violates the maxim, Grice's maxim, the maximum of quantity. They don't leave the space because they want all the attention on themselves, because that's the thing that makes them safe, that relieves the abandonment anxiety. So in order to get your side of the conversation in, you have to interrupt them. And a lot of the times they're counting on your politeness that you won't do that, right? Which is a manipulation.
Or walk away. Like I couldn't do that. It was just
Yeah, or walk away. And actually that's the thing that happens most often is everybody walks away. It breaks up the conversation when somebody does that. And that they find confusing because they had finally gotten the attention.
So
Go ahead.
is this a typical um, disorganized
No, this is a typical
talk and talk and
preoccupied
talk?
strategy.
I mean, I'm sorry, preoccupied. Is
Yeah,
this a typical trait?
yeah, it's a
And
typical.
it's not because it's because they don't have a pause because they're so trained not to be able to get what they want that they're at.
Well, it's not. It's that getting the attention is unpredictable, and they have no way of knowing how they would get it back if they lose it, so they hold on to it.
Okay.
If they understood that they leave a gap and the other person responds and then leaves a gap, and then you just get the attention right back, they would be able to enter into a more secure dynamic. But because they find getting the attention back so unpredictable, they feel unsafe in getting it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Disorganized people talk in riddles, which is different. Disorganized people will say something that they want to communicate to you, but they'll wrap it up in a Baroque cover so that if it doesn't land in the way that they anticipated it would land, they can make it into something else. And that way protect their vulnerability, their authenticity. But a preoccupied person doesn't do that because they don't monitor in the same way. Now, the other thing that preoccupied people do is they'll join a conversation and then in 2 sentences, they'll switch the topic without consent. And then if the conversation gets going again and they lose attention, when they get it back, they'll switch the topic of the conversation again without consent. You can license the change of a topic in a conversation where everyone will go along, but preoccupied people don't tend to license it. They just tend to switch it. And what they're really attempting to do is switch the conversation to a topic that only they can talk about because nobody else has knowledge of it. And the reason that they do that is because it relieves the pressure of people wanting to chime in because nobody has anything to say. And that's the thing that typically leads to the end of the conversation because nobody has any interest in the topic that has been arrived at. And this is confusing for the preoccupied person because they finally land on a topic where only they can talk about it and then the conversation breaks up. Mudit?
so I'm realizing something is that it's not just physical proximity. Like a quiet, preoccupied one be happy because he has or she has physical proximity, but the attention also needs to be on the preoccupied person.
Proximity and attention.
Both. That's the reason that they're famous. I mean, we see them as the people who talk too much, or is that the reason?
Well, they talk too much if that's the strategy that they're using. Another strategy, of course, is to elicit from you. So they present you a fake problem, then you offer them solutions to the problem. It doesn't matter to them whether you can solve the problem or not, because you're paying attention to them. So it's not always that they're doing all the talking. They could be just provoking you to talk to them, and that would be also satisfying. But what really is happening is all of the attention is focused on you. Now, your attention is really on trying to solve their problem, but it's a fake problem and it doesn't need a solution, so they don't really care about that. And if you solve the problem, this is what I call the helpless loop. They present a problem to you, and you offer them a genuine solution, and they reject the solution and re-present the problem. That's the hectoring again. That's the asking again, that process of asking. And then you offer them a different solution and they reject that and represent the problem. And then you offer them another solution and they reject that and represent the problem. And all of a sudden you're beginning to have these feelings of helplessness, because it doesn't matter what solution you offer. They're always going to reject it because they associate an actual solution to a real problem as the end of the need for proximity, which they don't want. And it even goes into sex. They'll have problems in sex, either delaying their own orgasm or delaying your orgasm. Because if they associate your orgasm with the end of sex, which is the end of proximity, since they're not actually there for sexual gratification, but they're there for proximity, it's never satisfactory, and you never come to a great climax because that would mean the end. So there's always problems there. Or that's one of the main ways that it's relatable.
There's a sense of coming to an end. It's almost like they have this, I don't know, loss or the sense that this will come to an end. So they are not in the moment.
And that causes the earthquake of abandonment terror to go off, and then the strategies to entangle you. Preoccupied people use pretend problems, but there's always an implicit ask associated with them. I'll do this for you if you do that for me, but the you do that for me is never expressed. It's only, oh, I'm going to be generous and do this for you. And then if you don't pick up on that implicit aspect of the contract and you don't fulfill it, even though it's never been presented and you've never agreed to do it, they become enraged at you. Preoccupied people present in three different ways. One is fearfully preoccupied, so it's all about fear and the reassurance around fear. Angrily preoccupied is this sort of badgering expression of anger that you haven't fulfilled your promises, even if you didn't make them. And then passively preoccupied really looks on the outside like somebody who's dismissing. The difference between a passively preoccupied person and a dismissing person is that when the dismissing person shuts down, it's quiet in there, not much going on. And in a passively preoccupied person, it's just this churning upset on the inside with no outwardly expression. Quite different. Is that making sense? So the way out of preoccupation is to come out of pretend mode, mainly, and move in the direction of authenticity. In order to...
You sometimes talk about how we deal with people that are preoccupied, and then
Right.
there's if you are, because I am preoccupied, and so when you say that, are you talking about, is it a preoccupied person can come out of it, or the person that the preoccupied person is dealing with can come out of it with what you're about to say?
I was going to talk about how a preoccupied person can come out of preoccupation.
Okay. Thank you.
The main shift is coming out of pretend mode. And the way that that really looks is you move from an inauthentic presentation to an authentic presentation. Another way to put that is you move from the artificial presentation of what you're doing with the implicit understanding of what you want back from it to an explicit expression of what it is that you're doing. So that you have to say explicitly what you're willing to do and what you expect in return for it, rather than offer to do something for somebody and leave the return out of it. You then have to train your attention to disengage from the empathetic experience of other people and from the mind state of other people, and turn your attention to your own emotional state and your own mind state. And then you need to begin to learn to regulate your own emotions so that you're not dependent on other people to regulate your emotions. We have different meditation strategies for that, so that you learn, you have developed clarity on your own emotions, and you develop strategies for regulating your own emotions. Coming out of pretend mode where you're actually expressing yourself authentically is hard. And part of it is a cognitive decision that you need to make, but you haven't developed your cognitive mind very much. You have to develop your cognitive mind to understand why you would want to do that. You have to begin to monitor in order to be able to do that. And so the training is to learn to monitor your thoughts and your mind states, learn to monitor your own emotions, and learn to regulate your own emotions. There's a lot more to do in correcting this for a preoccupied person than for what a dismissing person needs to do. Once you've been able to increase your mentalizing capacity, your cognition enough that you can begin to discern what you like to do, what you find meaningful to do from what you don't, then you can begin the process of developing exploration, your own primary exploration, so that you can derive meaning from the life that you have. One of the things about preoccupied people is they don't tend to explore, not because there's a defect in the capacity to explore, but because it was so interfered with by your caregiver's demands on you in childhood that you didn't really learn to do it. Once you begin to explore, then you have the prerequisites for entering into a secure functioning relationship, because exploration is one of the vital pieces, the exchange of discoveries, the exchange of information about your explorations really causes those relationships to sail along for decades in a lot of cases, because they're so meaningful. Most of the time you're going to have to renegotiate relationships with other people, because one of the usual strategies for preoccupied people is to take on the care of the other person, not as a generosity for providing care, but attempting to elicit their dependency on you taking care of them. It's one of the ways.
Is that codependency?
Yeah. You take care of them. You take care of them for things. You take care of things that they should really do for themselves, so that they'll become dependent on you and won't be able to leave you because of it. That's how you're assuaging the earthquake of abandonment terror. You figure that you do all these things for them, they would never leave you, because they would then have to, again, do them for themselves. You need to stop doing that, because all of that is consuming the energy that you need for your own exploration. And it doesn't actually relieve the anxiety enough to be worthwhile. The abandonment terror is that constant, unrelenting, ongoing anxiety that they're about to leave you. One of the things that preoccupied people tend to do is throw down ultimatums, which are some form of, if you don't do this, I'm leaving. Because they're so insecure about the stability of the relationship that it doesn't seem like a big risk. Who did?
I'm sorry, why would the preoccupied do that if he or she will face the consequences of abandonment if they say it's like I will leave you, or why would they say that?
Because they're burning out and they're dissatisfied with the relationship, and the all of the stuff that they do for the other person that provides the care for them is why they think the other person is wanting them. And if they threaten to withdraw it, what they're hoping to elicit from the other person is reassurance that they don't want them to leave. Is that making sense? I do all of the care for you. If I leave, you're not taken care of. So I can threaten to withdraw that care from you, and that will force you to fold because you can't really do it for yourself. It's not true, but it appears to be true. But also understand that on the other side, dismissing people tend to seduce until they really think that you're hooked on their seduction, and then they begin to withdraw. So the preoccupied person is always in this perception of pursuing the other person. And when they get fed up, they stomp their feet and threaten to turn away and go. But what they're hoping is that then the person will flip and the seduction will start again. So it's a way of maintaining distance. The preoccupied person withdraws, they don't believe, and then they're seduced. And then the dismissing person withdraws, and then they pursue the dismissing person. But when the preoccupied person burns out, they're not going to follow. And then they make the grand gesture of walking away, hoping that in 3 steps they'll be spun around and reunion will happen. And a lot of the time, that is what happens, but some of the time it doesn't. And then you'll notice the dismissing person in that dynamic has replaced you in a few days, and it's absolutely maddening. That's when you go into that sort of total collapse, which is the plunge into the terrible sadness. One of the other things that happens to preoccupied people is you present this pretend, and then as you begin to move out of that into an authentic expression, what you discover is that the authentic expression is as successful in getting your needs met as the pretend mode was. And that really is heartbreaking. Really plunges you into the terrible sad, and that all the way along, or a long distance of the way along, you could have been asking for the things that you wanted. You could have been presenting your authentic needs, and that would have been met just as well as the pretend was. That projection of the caregivers who you have to pretend onto everybody else was wrong. That's what happens. In some sense, if you can't present authentically, you self-exclude from secure functioning relationships because they don't do that. They don't accept it. But I think also part of the terrible sadness for preoccupied people is that we learn to lie in order to be preoccupied. Not only do we learn to lie, we get really good at it because we have to sell these pretend notions to other people. And so we get really good at it. But it wasn't easy to learn that. It was excruciatingly painful, and it caused the loss of ourselves. So that's another thing. You're coming out of this pretend self into your authentic self, and your pretend self is really accomplished, really developed, and your authentic self is a klutz and not stumbling around. It doesn't have any of the finesse that your pretend self has. And sometimes the skills are transferable, but sometimes they're not. And so you have this slow period of developing the inauthentic self and to be as accomplished as the false self was. That I find painful a lot of the time. Because preoccupied people don't monitor particularly well, they never really understood consent very well. Dismissing people understand consent. They understand they have to license these things. And they do, but they mainly do it through seduction. And seduction, the way that dismissing people do it, is really about telling the other person what that person wants to hear, which is different from pretending to be somebody else in order to get care. The dismissing person is really, first they elicit from you what you want them to tell you, and then they spin it into this amazing version, and it's so intoxicating when they do it well. But they never intend to follow through on anything, because it's the delivery of the spin job, which is what they're trading, not the actual doing of it. So the reason why that works so well with preoccupied people is they're pretending it's a problem. It's not a real problem, so it doesn't need a real solution. So there's no deficit in that. Whereas with somebody who was actually expecting a real solution, the idealized response gets the dismissing person into trouble because they don't deliver. That makes sense. So the terrible sadness of the preoccupied person is the recognition that all this way along, where they've been pretending to be somebody else, who they really were was good enough, and that they could have made a life where people were actually responsive to them, to their authentic expression. And there's a process of pushing through that, the negative reaction, the negative anticipation to what will happen if you present your authentic self, so that you can. Would it?
What are the most common things in my life, what I've been or seeing with people my age would be introversion versus extroversion? How we idolize extroversion as being this is how you should be.
Right.
Is that also considered inauthentic, or is that just a skill that people say, oh, you can be an extroverted, you just have to learn that skill? I'm never sure if that's.
So I think we need a little definition here. When you say introversion and extroversion, to me, what I hear is an introvert is working with goals and achievements that are internal to them and don't necessarily reflect the societal values. And an extrovert is somebody who's organized around gathering the external tokens of success and an orientation like that. But it can also mean that you're not expressive particularly, or lively and engaging with people.
Yeah.
If you attach that to the original meaning, you don't really have much of a need to express what you're working on achieving because it's personal to you, and whether you get it or not matters to you, and you're not expecting much in the way of external approbation. But the extrovert, of course, is going for the trophy. They want that adulation that comes from that, or they want the house or the car, or whatever it is, the social position, because that's the thing that makes them feel satisfied at achieving. So it really does then, what was your family's orientation toward introversion or extroversion? And how well did you have the skills, the innate skills that were necessary to pursue the family's choice of what was meaningful, so that if you feel pressured to achieve in a very conventional way, you might find the extroversion preferable as a means of getting it. If there was a more internal, more in the family system, this is where you learn it, obviously, in the family system, and what you're rewarded for. And then you have, of course, what is it that you're good at? What is it that you find meaningful? And how well does that line up with the family system and the demands that they have for you in the system? Do you have secure parents who were interested in what mattered to you, what were interested in what you were good at, and encouraged and supported you to do that, and then supported you gathering the skills that you needed to do it? Or did they have an idea of what the family needed of you and push you in the direction of achieving that, whether it was meaningful to you or not, or whether you were good at it or not? And that comes from the same misattunement that causes insecure and disorganized attachment, or security with features, where they just they're not paying attention to you and supporting you. They're paying attention to themselves and what matters to them. If you look at my family system, my older brother was pushed toward the Ivy League because my parents were Ivy. My younger brother and my younger system were pushed toward an ordinary level of college achievement because the older brother was taking care of that piece, and they wouldn't pay for my education because they didn't think I needed an education, because they decided that I was going to be the child that stayed home and took care of them when they got older. So all of us had the experience of really disinterest in who we were and what mattered to us, and really were set into the roles of an upwardly mobile, immigrant family. Really, my 2 generations out, we were poor Irish, poor German. So that's the thing. And then how do you, whenever you're put in a position as a child to develop a skill set that is external to you, you do your very best to develop it. There aren't children that refuse. That isn't really what happens. But then you get to a place later in your life where actually you have some agency in choosing what you want to do. And then you see what it is. And then when we begin to look at the misogyny, extroversion is masculine, introversion is feminine. What happens if you're a male and you're introverted? there's enormous societal pressure to change that because it's otherwise you're acquiescing to being feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're a female and you're extroverted, there's pressure on you to tone it down because it's too masculine.
But it feels like
Want to
my
fit
belief
in.
systems. It's not my family system, but it's mine.
Right.
Feels like that.
Where did it come from, though? We start off with a family. By the time we're 3, we're pretty much locked into what they want. And then we take that off to the playground. That's the second part. And then we try to fit into the social hierarchy of the elementary school, which is, a vicious place.
But it can't happen in college.
Well, certainly, but in college, it's the conflict resolution themes, which is the third set of attachment experiences. And it's also aided by the fact that your cognitive mind is so much more capable in college than it was in elementary school or middle school. And also there's for most people, sex drive for some kind of sexual interest that arises that wants to be satisfied. And that, the hierarchy of sexual desirability is, it's better to be on the top of that than on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are so cruel about it. And then, of course, it's, homophobic beyond belief, even now. I mean, with this administration, I mean, well, they're probably already building camps to load all the trans people into. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And then who's right after the trans people? It's not like they're stopping there. So what happens when you're not a monogamous cis pair of heteros? What happens to you, right? You're slaughtered, basically, in the way our culture teaches sexual expression. And you see it everywhere, the casualties of people that don't fit into that. And completely unnecessarily, I mean, even Freud in the 1890s wrote a paper that said that he could find nothing about homosexuality that was wrong. It was just an ordinary variation in human sexuality. I mean, the basis of that prejudice is not about the ordinariness of it or the appropriateness of it. So, well, we have a few minutes left. Do you want to do a little bit of meditation?
Yes.
Uh,
May I make a request?
sure.
This was a very boy, you hit a lot of spots on this that brought back a lot of very painful memories of my childhood. So anything that is healing in it would be appreciated from my point of view,
Let's do some loving kindness practice then. All right.
if that's
So,
okay with Mudit.
yeah. So go ahead and settle in, closing the eyes, scanning through the body. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? Good.
Very good.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
When I do this practice, the mind state is different, but the sense that if I send it to the whole of me, then there is these unpleasant feelings and thoughts that come up. It's almost like I'm blocking it, but as soon as I do metta, there's like or I can accept the whole thing, but then there are these random unpleasant thoughts.
Uh-huh. Can you view the thoughts through the mind state?
It's view the thoughts or view myself when I was in the scene before.
Well, you have a thought, and you have the filter of loving kindness, and you look through the filter at the thought so that it changes the intensity of the thought.
For me, it's considering the surrounding air to be the view. I cannot hold the view because I'm the one so it's almost
Yeah.
like the air is the view. And the air is sending it back to me, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you.
So Saturday is the second day of the meditation and attachment level 1 class. The following Saturday, the 27th, is the third day. If you want to jump on that. We have a kaleidoscope coming up on the 26th, which is the monthly gathering of the Sangha. Let's see here, what else is happening? In September, in January, October is what I meant. On the 11th is the intermediate mentalizing class. And on the 18th is the advanced mentalizing class. This is really about exploration and how to explore and what the additional mentalizing skills you'll need beyond the basics. And then on October 21st, we're starting a level 2 class. So that's what's coming up. We sent out a inquiry as to whether people would want to do a virtual retreat, and we got a really good response to that. So we're going to schedule a retreat from December 29th until January 2nd, which is going to be virtual so that you might be able to do it. So if you want to. So that's everything that's coming up.
George, have
Yeah.
you ever considered using what your curriculum is to do a course on forgiveness?
I could do sometimes in the level 1 addiction class we do a forgiveness, but I could actually do a half day on forgiveness if that works. Maybe we'll try
It's
it.
something it's something I have the most challenging relationship with, is forgiving. All the part of this attachment stuff that we're doing is I have to be able to forgive the caregivers and forgive myself to move as part of my path. And I just hold on to what I'm upset with and use it as an excuse more often than I'd like. And if you had one every month, I would take that one every
Right.
single month until I get it right, because I think it's part of my path of becoming secure.
I agree. And another place you might look to do it is in IPF, because
What
we do
is that?
ideal parent figure protocol.
Okay.
We do a lot. There's a lot of focus on seeing the caregivers the way that they were and understanding what happened.
Great. Okay.
So
Thank
that's
you.
actually part of that process. Good to see you. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you're resourced and you can make a donation, you will. There's a link on the website to do that. I hope to see you soon somewhere along the path.
Thank you, George.
Right. Bye now.